Okay, g'day, Pete Warden here from Next Level Wealth. I'm joined today by Darren Kingdon, who's based down in Brisbane. Darren, how's it going?
Good, mate. Thanks for having us.
Yes, we've been talking about doing this catch up for a while. So I thought just by way of a bit of background, maybe just give us a bit of an overview, who you are, what you do today and how you got into the advisory side of things.
Well, okay, yeah, Darren. Well, basically, I think we've got a bit of a connection through the old Great Malden Cricket Club in the UK. So I was basically a bit of a cricketer, chasing that for many years, and then just sort of somehow fell into financial advice. Really, I think I applied for a job at AMP probably in the late '80s, early '90s. Didn't get the job, and then they phoned us up 6 months later saying, look, did anybody ever get in contact with you? I said no. Then there happened to be another job that was sort of going at the time. Got it. Then I was sort of in a role was in some sort of technical role for about 3 months, and then AMP restructured again. And then just found my way down to Sydney in another sort of technical role. So I fell into a lot of technical roles there for probably 10, 15 years. Wrote a couple of books along the way, and then probably 10 years ago just started to do my own thing, providing strategic advice for clients, estate planning, and a lot of self-managed superannuation fund work. So that was how it sort of all evolved.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to do the chat today was to give people some ideas on self-managed super funds, because it's outside my area of technical expertise. But before we get on to that, tell us a bit about your cricket career, because obviously, Queenslanders would remember, and certainly people in Sydney grade cricket from back in the day would remember you as one of the best batsmen around.
Well, thank you very much for saying that, but I don't know if that's exactly true. But yeah, I was a country boy from New South Wales. Went down, chased the cricket dream. Went down to Sydney, played a lot of senior cricket at a place called Waverley in the eastern suburbs. It's now called the Eastern Suburbs Cricket Club. Basically played a bit of under 16s there, and then under 21s, and ultimately into first grade. Played a bit of second 11 there, and I guess I think Greg Matthews was a teammate. He was good friends with Ian Healy. So then ultimately, because there was a bit of a logjam to make it into the New South Wales sort of Shield team there for many years, made me way up Queensland and played with Norths and Wests up there. Ended up playing a couple of games for Queensland, and funnily enough, I mean, I blame my cohort here, Greg Rowell. They ran me out at the Gabba one day for shortening my Sheffield Shield career, but probably not a coincidence that the Queensland team started to win when they dropped me, basically. So they started to rack up the Sheffield Shields after that.
Yeah, it was a long time coming, the first Shield win. I remember that. So yeah, we actually played at the same club over in England, and then coincidentally, or somewhat coincidentally, the same club in Sydney as well. In fact, I played one very funny season with Greg Matthews as well, albeit at a lower grade than yourself. So yeah,
every grade with Greg would be fun.
There was never a dull moment, put it that way.
Oh, no.
So I thought a useful thing we can do for people today is just run through, I think specifically on self-managed super funds, which is one of your key areas of expertise. So I think first and foremost, when is self-managing superannuation a good idea, and when does it work? Because I guess this is an area that a lot of people often think about, but they don't really necessarily always know when self-managing is a good idea, and when are they likely to, when is it going to be cost effective, and when are they likely to see good results?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot to unpack in that, but I guess just starting off with I guess a lot of the mistakes, I think probably starting off with a few mistakes that people can make is that they set these sort of things up. They like the idea of control, but they don't really have a real plan. I mean, quite often you'll see people set up a super fund with good intentions, get out of the funds management world, And then but they don't really have a plan. They maybe like the idea of property, but they don't know how hard it is as well. And then they might not have the financial education to be able to back it up and to turn it into some good results for yourself. So a lot of the time, so some people can get sort of frustrated. They set these sort of things up, roll their money over, and then the contracts sort of fall over, or they're out of the market for a period of time, or they then go and get frustrated and buy something off the plan out in the sticks somewhere, and probably is a vulnerable sort of investment. So you do, I guess you do need to have pretty strong financial education and a desire to be in it for the long haul and learn from your mistakes and have the right mindset and surround yourself with the right mentors and things like that, because many of the day you'll sort of see people start these things off with good intentions and they end up back into the funds management world, which then probably defeats the purpose of having it in the first place.
Yeah, a little bit circular, I guess, if you end up putting money back into managed funds. I think, so I was a relatively early adopter on self-managed super. And certainly back in the day, it was a pretty expensive and onerous exercise to get the damn thing set up. So you had to pay for pretty expensive structures and advice, and even just getting the strategy advice, was a pain in itself. Obviously, a lot of these things have become more cost effective. So in my example, I quite like the idea of having an investment property as part of my pension. So I bought a place down in Geelong, which has worked pretty well, really, over 7 or 8 years. But yeah, I think what I probably didn't appreciate at the beginning, to actually even go through the process of setting up the bare trust structure, getting the mortgage, needed a bigger deposit. There was all little bits and pieces of rules that I didn't necessarily understand, and then beyond that, I could go on and do stocks. So I suppose first and foremost, is there a point at which a self-managed super fund becomes cost effective? Because presumably, if you've got to have annual accounting and audit and fees, and presumably if you've got a very small balance, it's not cost effective. But is there a point at which it becomes viable for people?
I think, look, there is, and that would be a case by case thing. I mean, I guess one thing that you do know, and the statistical evidence to back it up, is that small self-managed funds are really, really expensive. And you need to have a sort of an eagle eye on the costs just to be able to make sure that the thing's going to work, because as the Warren Buffetts of the world would say, costs could ruin a good investment. So you need to be across that. So small funds, under 200k, for example, can be very expensive. And what you're talking about is that, well, in your experience where you went in to borrow, borrow to invest in an investment property, well, then you've got an extra layer of costs as well, because you've got extra structures around that and extra protocols around all of that. So yeah, it's really important to sort of get across all of the costs. I think there's a lot of cost down pressure these days compared to probably 5-10 years ago. But so I mean, in terms of the the cost break even point, look, I think I guess in any, as an advisor, like, we usually look at that on an apples with apples. So look at the current scenario, what is the SMSF offering, and then you can figure out which one is more expensive than the other, if cost is the main determinative thing. I mean, a lot of people that do set up a super fund, a self-managed super fund, probably wouldn't do it for costs. If that's the overriding motivation, you're probably more about control and sort of starting to control your own retirement plan. But late last year, I think there was some departmental studies, that there was some talk about, up to $1 million being the cost break-even point. And then I think they basically reduced that back to around 500. So I'd say, look, if I had to pick one number, probably 500 would be probably a tipping point from one to the other. But you've got to be pretty choosy with the SMSF offerings that are out there as well, because there's a lot of opting in and a lot of opting out of that would have a bit of an impact on the overall costs.
Yeah, I certainly know that in my circumstance, cost was one thing, but being a Brit and did most of my professional career in London, my super balance was never that big anyway, even when I pulled it with my wife. So cost was only really a small part of it. It was really what we call it the 3 C's: cost, choice, and control. It was more just, as you said, taking control of the investment, and also for people learning to manage their own money. I mean, there's obviously long-term benefits in that, especially when you move into the retirement phase, because you feel a lot more confident if you've been managing your money for a long time. So we might just come back to the property side of things, because that's a landscape which has changed a lot over recent years with the Royal Commission and lending changes and so on. Might just come back to that. So in terms of, because obviously you would see a lot of people self-managing or going down that route. So where do you see the main successes from people self-managing, and where do you see the main failures or mistakes?
Property and property. You know, believe it or not, the most success is certainly property. I mean, the self-managed superstructure is very friendly because there's so many strategic levers you can pull to be able to make it work. You know, it's possible, for example, to do some sort of types of property developments with involving a self-managed funds. It's possible to do it with other people. It's possible to borrow, as you've alluded to. So there's a lot of potential structures to be able to make a property or real estate deal come together and work. Now that doesn't guarantee any success, of course, because it's, you know, you need to be able to be judicious in your selection of property and do your own due diligence around that. So I'd say certainly I guess a lot of the big funds, you know, tend to have a heavy property bias, and people have been doing it for decades. Like, they're not sort of just coming in, and, you know, towards their retirement date and all of a sudden wanting to become a property investor. But on the flip side, a lot of the worst mistakes I've seen have been involved in property as well, like some joint venture stroke property development deals gone bad. I mean, probably one of the cardinal sins that I've often seen is self-managed funds buying things off the plan. You know, getting back to what I sort of said before, people probably starting these sort of things off with good intentions, wanting to give it a good crack with their own financial education and building on that. But then they get impatient, get a bit frustrated, and then all of a sudden they're buying something out in the sticks, low socioeconomic environment with probably a rental guarantee, and then all of a sudden their equity is sort of halved in value in a couple of years' time. So unfortunately, there's a bit of that as well. So you've got to have your eyes wide open with buying property, and particularly buying something that's new. I mean, I often sort of say to clients, if you're thinking about off the plan, well, and there's rental guarantees involved, just think about it. They're just asking for a higher purchase price.
Yeah, it is amazing actually, because we didn't even talk about this before we came on, but it's amazing how often you get these recurring themes, and, you know, people buying high-rise apartments off the plan, or, you know, house and land packages that are 50 miles away from the employment hubs, and it very often comes back to it's a bit of a honey trap, really, off the plan and new property, and you very often find that people pay a premium to buy new, which is essentially the developer's profit. Plus, there's often people within the process taking a cut to make the sale as well. And you often find, like, after 5 or 10 years, the property is no longer new, the rental guarantees dropped off, and you're left with a second-hand property, just like any, buying any new vehicle or whatever. It's no longer got its newness premium, and you often struggle even to get your money back on some of those investments.
And you've touched on another point there as well. I mean, there's been a few in the CBD here or around Fortitude Valley where there has been some conflicted financial advisors, basically selling whole apartment blocks and going down the road that you've talked about, and following the money back to probably some behind the scenes payments and things like that, which is never going to be a great outcome for the investor, great outcome possibly for the advisor. I mean, not in this case because he got caught, but as an investor, you've got to have your radar on for that sort of thing.
Yeah. Look, I always just think when advisors are specifically recommending new builds, it's not always a red flag, but you just got to be careful because it's
Mm.
often there's commissions, 5 or 6% kickbacks. The rental guarantee, as you said, is usually a red flag in itself because uh, you know blue chip or investment grade property doesn't need a rental guarantee. It usually means that, as you said, you're just paying a higher price.
Mm.
So in terms of borrowing to do self-managed super fund property, you'd be much more across the latest landscape than me because it's a long time since I've done it. But I imagine during the Banking Royal Commission, a lot of the non-standard loans were the first things to dry up. So presumably there's not as many lenders doing SMSF mortgages these days, but is it still viable for people if they want to do property and super?
Yeah, it is. It's still very much viable. I mean, you don't see it. I mean, you often hear governments sort of talking about, creating a bubble as a result of super funds being able to borrow to invest, but statistically, it's at a very small level of the total superannuation pie. I think it might be, in that 4 or 5% sort of range. So there's sort of not a lot to that. But in terms of lenders, I mean, I've been a lot of the big lenders are officially out. But if you're a good enough client, we're still seeing that big banks will still look after sort of certain types of clients. But you are seeing sort of more of those smaller to middle lenders emerge as well, like, some like Latrobe and Liberty and among others. I think BOQ, they're still in that. So there's still a number of options out there. In terms of probably from when you did it, there's a lot more, probably a lot more compliance around it now as well. So it's certainly not a free kick, but you certainly want to make sure you've got your pre-approval before you go to an auction or any of that sort of stuff, which is another story. But yeah, so probably on the limited recourse borrowing side of things, and you also need to have a fair bit of cash in the tin post-transaction. Like that's what I guess the behaviour we're seeing with a lot of. So in other words, they want to know that there's a bit of cash left over when all is said and done to be able to pay the bills, pay the loan back, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think well, there's a whole range of different points coming out of that, but I think the thing to bear in mind if you're thinking about self-managing your superannuation, and this is probably the key takeaway point, you need to go and see an independent advisor like yourself, Darren, who's got the client's best interests at heart. So I can remember during the property boom years, if you went down to I was the speaker at some of those home buyer show events over the years, and you'd see people walking along the aisles and almost being pulled into stalls saying, "Oh, do you want to set up a self-managed super fund?" And then, usually behind that, house and land packages, off-the-plan apartments. And you've got to look at that situation and say, when somebody's offering you free advice, it's not because they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. It's usually because there's a commission in it for them. So I think first and foremost, you need to go and see an advisor who can actually give you an independent view, as you can with your services, to actually see, is it actually even viable for somebody to self-manage? Should they do it? And if so, what is the best strategy to follow? And as you've already touched on.
And that's exactly right. And even adding to that, just stress test it, and question it and ask more questions. And a lot of the time you find is that, one person's definition of a net return is almost always different to another person's definition of a net return. And there's a lot of costs with property. Property is an expensive game, and there's a lot of costs and duties and legals and searches and all these sort of things that add up to that can effectively compromise a return. So you might be buying something on what one person might think is a 4% yield, but it might really be a 2% yield. And that'll have an impact on how you repay the thing if you are borrowing. You need to know all this before, so you want to be stress testing the investment as much as you can and look at a couple of worst case scenarios as well. What if, okay, the interest rates might not be going up too quickly anytime soon, but just assume that they do. How would you be able to cope with those repayments?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's important for people to do the work and as you say, look at some worst case scenarios, because at the end of the day, it is your pension. It's not something to be taken lightly. Now, DK, I know you've got a book coming out, or is due out this month. So can you tell us a bit about what's the title, where people can get their hands on a copy, and what you cover in the book?
Yeah, thank you. No, look, it is called Master Your Super, and website address is www.masteryoursuper.com.au. I mean, basically, I've put that together just because I feel that there's people are getting increasingly frustrated with dealing with financial middlemen. So for people that are wanting to do a bit more for themselves and to stress test their own ideas against, some investment masters, then this is sort of something for the community. I mean, there's a lot of things going on at the moment with royal commissions, and there's fallout from that with, gross misconduct of big institutions and financial groups, and COVID-19 is now exposing, a lot of big super funds, and they're not, they're not being true to label, and perhaps those balanced funds aren't as balanced as what many people would think. So it's a lot of things, a lot of ours just taking control of it yourself and how you're going to respond to this sort of stuff. Because look, there's 4 economic seasons out there. A wise man would be wanting to have investments that can cover each of those 4 economic seasons, not just one with it, which is a boom time for shares, for example. You want to have a wide cross section of different assets. So, it's really just for the community and for the investor that might be thinking about self-managed. Has been toying with the idea of already got one and just sort of seeing if they can make it work a bit harder.
Yeah, fantastic. So what I'll do, I'll put a link in the video notes below to Master Your Super, so you can get your hands on a copy there. Or if you want some independent advice on whether you should self-manage, and if so, how, just drop a line to Darren, who's a specialist in the space, and I'm sure you'll be more than happy to help out. So is there anything else that we need to cover off, DK, before we let you go? Because it looks like your microwave could be about to get some use there.
I've already had lunch. No, I'm all good, mate. But no, thank you very much for your time. Good to catch up with you again, and hopefully we'll see you on the cricket field sometime soon.
Yeah, I don't know. My knees are probably about as...
Or golf course, one or the other.
Yeah, I think golf's more up my street these days. State of my knees. So, all right.
True.
Thanks very much for joining, and we'll be in touch. Cheers, DK.
Good on you, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.